Thank you everyone for being here. We have a group online. You can't see them here, but I can see them there. So if you are online and you do have questions eventually, if you raise your hand, I'll be able to see that. To ask questions. Okay, we're good. Okay, so I'm Jackie Kuehl. I'm the Executive Director of the Digital Marketing Degree Program here at DePaul University. I started and teach an AI and marketing class, which has been exhausting. And so keeping up, a number of people in the room helped me keep up, including the panelists and reading every day. So I'm super excited about this topic because it's moving so fast. And I'm really excited to see the discussion that comes out of today. I was told I should give a little plug, though, for DePaul University and our digital marketing degree program. Tech Guide just ranked us as number 6 in the country in the digital marketing degree program. So I'm very proud of that. And there's going to be more to come. So I'm very excited about the direction of where that's going. So today we have first Bamshad is going to present, and I'll tell you more about him. And he'll present for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then our panel will start after that. And we'll move the chairs over for those of you online so you can see better. And I have some questions, but we'll also take questions from the audience here and online. So with that, let me introduce Bamshad. And he's done so many cool things that I have to read it. Dr. Bamshad Mobasher is a professor of computer science and the director of the Center for Web Intelligence at DePaul University's Jarvis College of Computing and Digital Media in Chicago. He is also the chair of the Artificial Intelligence program at the School of Computing. His general research areas include artificial intelligence and machine learning. In particular, he is considered one of the leading authorities in web personalization and recommender systems. He has published 5 books and he has published 5 edited books and over 250 scientific articles on topics related to the applications of AI and machine learning in user modeling, automatic personalization, and recommender systems. As the director of the Center for Web Intelligence, he directs research in these areas and regularly works with the industry on various joint projects. So I'd like to welcome Bamshad to the stage. That should be working. Go down. There we go.
Thank you very much. Very excited to be here, and I'm actually very excited to hear the rest of the panelists later today, especially on some of the specific use cases in digital marketing. So I look forward to that. But for my part today, I'm going to sort of engage in a broad overview of where AI has been and where it is right now and maybe where it's going. And I hope that that provides sort of a general kind of a framework for the rest of our discussion. I'm not going to get specifically into marketing specifically, but more generally talk about sort of what's driving some of the new interest in AI. So there's obviously no doubt that AI has exploded into our consciousness in many different ways. And in many ways, it's disrupting, in fact, the way that we work, we live, we function. And of course, many companies, many organizations are trying to figure out how to leverage these opportunities without necessarily falling into the abyss. I think this is a really difficult thing to try to accomplish. So events like this are sort of designed to try to help accomplish that. So AI has been around for a very long time, despite sort of some of the new interest in AI. There are many versions of AI that have existed over the past decades and years. Of course, AI has always been part of the popular culture, part of fiction, part of movies, part of film. So in a very real sense, AI really as a concept existed long before even, what we consider right now the AI technologies that we see today. In fact, AI as a discipline really predates computer science to a large extent, because people from the very beginning, from the time of Alan Turing, 1950s, and then according to 1960s, even before Alan Turing, when you go back to the beginning of the work on computational mathematics, there was a lot of interest in artificial intelligence, particularly what intelligence is and how do you detect intelligence and what are its limits and all of that stuff. So AI actually is a very, very old kind of a discipline, old not in the sense like compared to, let's say, history or physics or chemistry, but in terms of computing disciplines, it's actually predates many of the kinds of things that you teach in a computer science program these days. So in fact, AI, we have seen a lot of sort of success stories in AI over the past decades. Some of these things have been around for many years. Web search, for example, in games, in finance, in e-commerce, in many different domains, AI has been used very actively for quite a long time. Predictive analytics, robotics, information extraction, natural language processing, and of course, autonomous vehicles and all of that stuff. Many of these things have been around for many, many years. So then why are we talking about AI so much now, right? So it turns out that there's a good reason for that. So I want to try to explain that a little bit, and then maybe that sort of sets the stage for the rest of our discussion. So to do that, I want to sort of distinguish between what I call the old AI versus the new AI. So some of the examples I just put on the screen before are what I would consider examples of the old AI. So first of all, AI is a very, very extensive field of study. It's not just machine learning or deep learning or large language models, right? Even though that's all you hear about these days. AI includes things like planning, it includes heuristic algorithms, knowledge representation, computational logic, lots of different things that people have been working on for decades. I myself have been in this field for 35, 36 years from the time when I was in the graduate school. And my initial work was in computational logic. And all of the work at that time, the focus of AI, was try to figure out how to make machines actually do logical reasoning, right? How do you get machines and intelligent agents to reason logically and be able to solve problems through logical reasoning? So all of that, think of the big circle as being all of those things. One specific part of AI, which again, goes back into the 1960s, even before that, is what we call machine learning. Many of you probably in this room have used machine learning in many different ways. If you've used a regression model or created classification tree, any kinds of those things, these models, predictive models, those are examples of supervised machine learning. There's also unsupervised machine learning, like clustering, what do you do using, for example, for customer segmentations and other kinds of things. So that area has also been around for a long time. Then we have deep learning. Deep learning relates to neural networks, but this is a much more kind of a modern and newer kind of a technology that's been developed. And part of that is because neural networks by themselves have been around for a long time, but nobody had figured out how to connect them in ways that the different layers of neural networks can feed into each other and do much more sophisticated things. And actually can, for example, understand certain kinds of semantics within the data that wasn't possible before. So that's where deep learning comes in. And there are lots of different deep learning models. And people have been working on deep learning for the past, I would say, 15, 20 years. And a lot of the work that's been done up until about 2016, 2017 has been focused on the kinds of deep learning models that requires lots of data to be input into the models, and then try to understand the sequences and then make predictions based on those sequences. So many of these machine learning models, and I'm just focusing on machine learning models, the characteristics of them, including the deep learning ones, was that you train these models on some very specific data sets, right, related to a particular task or domain. Let's say, customer purchases, or let's say, maybe in a banking setting, you have a bunch of information about people who have taken out loans before, and whether they were rejected or not, and you can sort of classify them as high risk or low risk, et cetera. So you build the model on data sets that are labeled and that are very specific to that domain, and then you make predictions in that particular domain, right? So you have, if you want to do different tasks, you build a separate model for each task. And those models are trained on very specific data. Well, this has been sort of the framework right now, up to this point. And in fact, much of the work in AI is still based on these kinds of models. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're perfectly good models in specific settings. But this brings us to sort of this paradigm shift that's been happening, I would say, starting around 2017. And 2017 was a very specific date because that's where this idea of a transformer model was developed by folks at Google, and then lots of different variations of it were developed by many others. And what that model enabled deep learning researchers to do is to integrate a lot more data and then be able to process it much more efficiently. So I won't get into the technical details of it, but that is a very fundamental kind of a departure point that resulted in the idea of why not, instead of developing a single model for each different task, so you have many different models, develop just one model based on all of the data that you can get your hands on. Pre-train that model. Then take that pre-trained model and then tune it or adapt it to some specific task. This is the idea of large language models, for example, right? But people have come to sort of talk about these as foundation models because they go beyond just text, which is, deals with language. You're dealing with images, you're dealing with lots of different kinds of data. So generative AI applications that we often talk about sort of fall into this characteristic. So you have models that are being trained on huge amounts of data from everywhere. So that gives these models a lot of power and flexibility, but then they can be adapted to specific sort of tasks, from question answering to classification to prediction and other kinds of things. So much of the work that's going on right now in AI is here, right? I mean, there are companies that are developing these large language models, these foundation models, but a lot of the applications that you see that are, thousands of applications literally that are coming out are based on using some of these pre-trained models and then adapt them to specific domains. Even ChatGPT itself, OpenAI's sort of a chatbot, is not itself a foundation model. It uses GPT-4, which is a foundation model, but then it's tuned and trained specifically for a specific task of conversational AI. So these foundation models, one thing that's important to recognize is that they are pre-trained, self-supervised models. They're trained on huge generalized kinds of data sets. And of course, still most of these models are trained on text data. Some of them are trained more specifically on image data. But sort of the holy grail is to try to create multimodal models. And I'll talk about that a bit more. They use these transformer architectures, these deep learning architectures. And basically what they do is predict word sequences based on what's been observed before, or perhaps segments of images based on what's been observed before, and so on. Now, these are general purpose models, but unfinished in the sense that they have to be tuned or adapted to specific kind of task, downstream task, using smaller amounts of data sets. This brings an enormous amount of flexibility, right? Because you don't have to have your own data necessarily to train the model originally. Also, the pre-trained models are trained on lots of data that brings in a lot of additional characteristics that you can use. But you can use a small amount of your own data in your specific domain, in your specific task, to try to tune that model. And the more of that data you have, the better. And then you can do this in different ways, right? For example, you can use what's called reinforcement learning to incrementally train that model further and tune it. So this is where the power of these foundation models come in. And you have seen a great many examples of these popping up everywhere. So I'm not gonna name all of those things. Now, the promise of these foundation models, and this is why OpenAI, some of these other companies are literally going to spend in the next few years probably hundreds of billions of dollars into training larger and larger models and more general models, is exactly because, first of all, it gives you additional expressivity, right? Especially if you can incorporate structured data, other kinds of data beyond just text into the training of these models. And then it gives you scalability because these transformer architectures allow you to actually integrate a lot more data into these models. Multimodality, maybe the holy grail that I was talking about, is to actually be able to incorporate all of these different types of data, right? From graph structured data to structured data to unstructured text data to image data, video data, everything. And the memory capacity, and this is a part that a lot of organizations and in research people are working on, is how to actually store the knowledge that's developed through the tuning of these models and then use them to further update and tune these models even more. And finally, again, another holy grail, compositionality, the idea that once you have these pre-trained models, they're general enough that you can actually, even if they're not trained on some specific kinds of data, they can still make predictions in a different data set. So they're cross-domain in some in a very specific way. So the generalization is one trend that you're going to see in the next few years. Another trend that's already on the way is to develop vertical foundation models. So sort of the opposite direction. And the idea here is that you would train foundation models, not necessarily on everything under the sun, but in data sets that are specific to a particular domain. Let's say healthcare. So this example, you can imagine there's data sets from care providers, institutions, from pharma, from all sorts of medical publications that are available online, even sensor data, for example, from wearable devices, et cetera. And you can imagine that this data is in lots of different modalities, from video to genomic sequences to, let's say, graph structured data, like molecules, information about composition of different compounds, and structured data. And all of that goes into this training of this pre-trained model that's focused specifically on healthcare. And then it can be used, tuned for specific tasks in that domain, from everything from patient care to personalized medicine to et cetera. You can imagine something like that could also happen in marketing and customer experience, right? And in fact, people are doing that. So I'll let others who are more qualified here to talk about the applications of this in marketing, but we already see a lot of examples of using foundation and generative AI models in the context of marketing, everything from automating content creation in ads, for example, narrative development, video generation, image generation, et cetera, to personalization and customization. That's an area where my own research is focused on. So I've been doing work in developing algorithms for personalization and recommender system for the past 20 years, and longer, perhaps. But now we are talking about really a new level of personalization, because you not only are using customer data and maybe demographic data, maybe some domain knowledge data, you're actually using, if you're using these pre-trained model, data that captures context from lots of different areas and domains that could be incorporated into the task of personalization. So everything from personalized content in ads and emails to product recommendation, even personalized products that are created based on different components and modules, right? You can imagine, there were these, a while back, there were these, and there still are, these different companies that developed sort of giving people personalized deals, right? And they would, contract with different companies, and they give you a deal for this, let's say, meal in, I don't know, McDonald's, and maybe this item in someplace else. Imagine that you could actually create personalized deals that are a combination of different items that are put together in a product, or maybe a product that has different components that can fit together. You can actually customize it in a personalized way. So this kind of stuff is already happening, and of course, multi-channel personalization and customer engagement. So let me talk a little bit about misconceptions and potential perils of this, and sort of I conclude with that. The problem is that despite all of their power, these models, these generative AI models, even if you generalize them further, they still don't reason logically, right? They don't really think. They don't understand the meaning of a lot of the constructs that they create, despite what some people in the media might try to sort of anthropomorphize some of these models. They are not humans. They are not sentient, right? They're statistical models, and they're making predictions based on what they have seen before. So because of that, they can produce occasionally nonsensical stuff. They can produce word sequences, for example, that don't make sense, erroneous results, quote unquote hallucinations, what people refer to it. Furthermore, with careful prompt engineering, they can be made to do things that are not quite, kosher. So they could create malicious code, for example, or generate misinformation. They can also propagate and amplify biases in the data, either intentionally or unintentionally, and give misinformation. So on the issue of bias propagation, I think this is a very important issue that we have to think about. Despite their power, and perhaps because of their power, because you have this pre-trained kind of framework that gets adapted in many different domains, the possibility of bias propagation actually increases. Why? Because imagine how many applications are built on GPT-4 or some of these large language models. If there is bias in the training of those large language models, those pre-trained foundation models, that's going to propagate to all of those downstream applications. So that's one way bias can propagate. The other way bias can propagate is that because in the adaptation process, you're relying on smaller and smaller data sets, even a little bit of bias in that data potentially can be amplified a great deal when you are actually building your downstream applications. So there are huge issues here that need to be worked out. And there is research going on that, but not a lot of guardrails so far in deploying some of these models. So there are lots of other fundamental questions that have to be addressed. Bias mitigation was one of them. Transparency is another one, and explainability of the models. These are black box models, right? They're very difficult to explain why they are doing what they're doing. Even people who develop these models don't necessarily know why sometimes the model's behavior in certain ways, because there is a probabilistic stochastic approach that is used, right? So there is uncertainty involved in the output. Issues of privacy, right? The data that's being used to train these models could potentially sweep up a lot of important information that's private in nature. And if there is not done carefully, then it can lead to violation of privacy. Intellectual property. We all know that sometimes these models sweep up things that are, belong to, intellectual property of various individuals, from music to other kinds of data, and potentially it could violate people's rights. And finally, and let me just end with that, and maybe this is one of the most significant aspects, is the issue of control and accountability and concentration of power. The actual pre-trained models, these large foundation models, particularly as they get larger and larger, only a few, literally a handful of companies can develop these, because they have the computational power, they have the resources to do it, right? You and I cannot do this. An individual company in Chicago working on marketing most likely cannot develop their own large language model. They have to rely on these large language models. And when they do, they're basically using all of the training that's been done by these companies, their data and everything else. So to a large extent, they're basically being controlled essentially by these companies. So it's an enormous concentration of power in the hand of very few companies. And this is going to get worse because they're trying to generalize these models and spend even more money on some of these models. All right, so I already talked too much, so I'll end here. Happy to answer questions or as part of the panel.
Yeah, if anyone has a question for Bamshad while we get our panel ready, I gotta move the chairs over. Be happy to take question actually about that power, wasn't it? Jordan would know this. Isn't WWP working with Google announced like today? Since there's a lot of advertisers, right? Because they can't do it by themselves, so they're working with Google now to do that. So, thank you. So if I could ask our panelists to come up, I'm gonna rearrange some things here so that those online can see. That's right. And what was that? To get that out of the way. Everybody gets a microphone. Excuse me. Hi. How are you?
Hello.
Oh, hello. So, thank you to our panelists who are here. I'm so appreciative, and they all have a unique perspective and experience with generative AI. So I'll start by having them say a sentence or two so you know their area of expertise as we move forward.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Justin Canning. I work with Akkio, that's Akkio. We are an AI platform that allows you to use natural language to transform data, analyze the data, generate charts and graphs, and we have an auto ML engine so you can do predictive modeling as well without having to write any code. I'm an account executive there, so my focus area is more around data and analytics.
Hi, I'm Stacy Bohrer. I work at Openx, proud sponsor of this great program. Openx is a supply-side platform, so our clients are publications like Wall Street Journal, Warner Brothers Discovery, and we help monetize their programmatic opportunities. We use AI in many ways, but certainly to improve advertiser performance, most notably.
Hi, my name is Scott Dayton. I'm the founder and CEO of Design Strategy, an advisory firm based in Chicago and London. We advise companies on issues. We help companies navigate kind of the ethical governance, strategic realignment questions around AI adoption. Been in IT leadership and executive roles for over 30 years. I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy from St. John Vianney Seminary in Miami. And a postgraduate diploma in organizational leadership from the Said Business School at the University of Oxford.
Hey, how's everyone doing? My name is Jordan Wilson. I'm the founder and host of Everyday AI. So we are a media company as well as a consultancy. So I'm lucky enough to get to talk to smart people like this every single day. We have a top tech podcast on Spotify. So people like leaders who are building the AI that we use on a daily basis, people at NVIDIA, Microsoft, IBM, etc. I'm lucky enough to get to spend my day talking to those kind of people every single day.
I listened to it this morning, it's very good.
I listen every morning with coffee.
No, you met me.
And and we know Bamshad. So I thought I'd start with general things that companies are doing wrong. And I don't know if we want to start with Jordan and then who else wants to get into this. What are general issues around companies adopting generative AI regularly? Because I've heard that it's still a very small portion of companies that are actually integrating, right?
Yeah, so I think it was an EY study that said generative AI implementation was a top priority for, I believe, 87% of companies. yet only 4% of companies have implemented generative AI organization-wide. So there's a huge gap in what leaders are saying and what's actually being done. And I'd say one of the biggest reasons for that is basic training and education, right? So you'd be surprised, like literally people who are building the models that we use every single day don't even necessarily know how to use them, or their teams aren't necessarily trained on proper ways to implement them. So I think that there's a lot of problems in terms of implementation, but I'd say at the core, it's really just education, because I think people sprint to try to win time back, or they sprint to try to get a use case or a pilot off the ground before actually understanding how these different generative AI models even work. So that's what I would say is one of the biggest problems right now that is causing businesses and creating that gap between what they're saying, in front of their shareholders or, in boardroom meetings, and then with what's actually happening in the day-to-day of running their business.
Yeah, and I'd add to that. Actually, I wouldn't add to that, but I would start a new sentence and say, so we're in advertising and performance is everything. But if you can't glean the insights as to what led to that outcome, it makes it really hard to duplicate or to help your clients understand how you got to that success. So I'm seeing companies definitely using AI for performance, which we do as well, but without the ability to also tell your client, your partner, et cetera, how you got to said objective, it loses the ability to duplicate or take insights into other actions.
Yeah, I think in that same kind of vein, it's really understanding where does the AI start, where does the human leave off, and a lot of customers come to us and say we'd like to connect our data and have the AI just kind of tell us what to do, right? And if there's a product that does that and you're not using it yet, you're probably sunk already. But it's really understanding what can these tools do now, how can you have humans work really well with that technology and start to find the little wins that are going to help to drive your business 1% forward, as opposed to like AI should be solving everything for us right now. So it's knowing what the technology does and how to find the little wins first.
Scott, from an ethical, I know that's your thing, and compliance has got to have something to do with it, I imagine, too.
Yeah, I talk to executives and board members pretty much every day, and the issue and the hesitation around adoption between April of 2024 and April of 2023, when everybody was super excited about it, comes down to the issue of trust. And you touched on that earlier, the transparency in these systems, how do they arrive at the outputs and the recommendations that they make is not clearly understood, often even by the people who design the systems themselves. So until we can get our arms around that transparency question, there's not going to be trust in executive leaderships and organizations to really jump in as quickly as they might, and you're not going to get the trust of the end users or the customers or the patients to accept the recommendations that these systems are making.
And that's a big area of work right now in research, but it's a tough nut to crack. One other area that's I think is one of the obstacles to adoption is also the issue of privacy. So a lot of companies do not want to run the risk of using their data that may then get swept up into retraining and then iterative sort of updating of these pre-trained models that belong to somebody else. So they have two choices: either develop their own more localized models, which have to use these maybe smaller versions of some of these open source models that usually don't work as well, or they have to give up sort of on the idea of using the pre-trained models altogether. So that's a big conundrum, and I've talked to a lot of companies who have not really quite figured out what's good with that. I think we have that problem even at Depaul.
Well, I think there's some, along those lines, there's some foundational things I think most organizations need to have in place before they should consider AI adoption. And a lot of organizations have these already to a certain degree, but you really need to be solid in all of them before I think you even start. The first is your data strategy. What's your relationship with your data? Is it, you're going to view it as a strategic asset where I'm only going to use this to train my own models because I believe that it'll strategically differentiate me in the market? It may be, I want to view it as my data as a financial asset, and I may license it out to other organizations to train. If you're in a not-for-profit environment, you may decide that you want to pool it with some peer organizations, train your own models, but pool your data so that you get a larger body of higher quality data. So first you need a data strategy. You need data security to start for reasons that you've already touched on. You need data governance. You really need to understand what your data is, where it came from. It's going to be a huge issue moving forward as regulatory frameworks start to solidify. And honestly, and this is a personal thing, you may disagree, I really think you need a cloud strategy. And the reason for that is, to be able to prototype, do quick proofs of concept. You don't want to go through the process organizationally of designing that system and scaling it in your data center. Have a cloud footprint so that you've got a quick place where you can try something really fast.
So Justin, I imagine with data and analytics, that's something you approach with customers and clients. And so where do you start? Like, what do you advise first? Are there steps? Does it vary widely, and how do you get your arms around that?
Yeah, I think it's first understanding what are the possible use cases and where are teams going to get application from tools like this. It's kind of going back to what I said before, like you don't want to try to boil the ocean right away. You want to find some quick wins and using tools to one, analyze your historical data, understand what has happened in past campaigns, who should we be marketing to, who are our buyers, what have they bought previously. Once you have a good sense of what has happened historically, then you can think about moving into more predictive modeling. What products are they likely to buy next? Where are my dollars better spent across different campaign types? And identifying the teams that can benefit from that, and ideally finding clients of theirs that are ready to partner with them if we're talking about an agency here. So it's finding the use cases first and not trying to take on the biggest overall problem first. Like talking about attribution, media mix modeling, like get comfortable using these types of tools first to understand basic campaign optimization. Bring in, like look at your Google ads first and look at your Facebook ads instead of trying to do like a massive cross-channel attribution modeling type exercise first.
Interesting. I just want to remind everyone here, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. I want to make sure anything gets addressed that's in the room and online. If you raise your hand, I can see you and we can have you jump in. So James.
So my question is, recently Sam Altman was quoted as saying 95% of the services that marketers do will soon be done by generative AI. So on behalf of the students in the room who are thinking about marketing as a career, what would your advice be for them?
Besides listening to Jordan's podcast every morning.
Yeah, I think it's super important now to learn the tools that are more cutting edge and that are going to give you an advantage in your career. When I was in college, I learned how to use Excel better than most of my friends, and I think that gave me a real advantage. And I think starting to use tools that can separate you in the workplace is important. But on top of where you're replaced by automation, it's understanding how to work in an organization, how to work better in a team, or even how to lead a team. I think are really important skills to start thinking about now, which most college kids probably aren't. But it's a lot of the kind of softer skills that are going to go a long way in terms of where can you exist outside of things that can be automated.
Yeah, I'm thinking about my day-to-day. So I lead sales and account management for Openx, and I'm thinking, outside of the actual campaign, 90% of my day is all things that could not be replaced by AI. It's just impossible. Relationships, negotiations, partnerships, there's just no way. So I would say my advice is to focus on exactly what you just said.
I was having a similar conversation with a good friend of mine who's a writer recently. My conversation with him really was the point I wanted to make to him, and I think it's applicable here, is an AI system could write the next Harry Potter novel and it would be good enough. What it can't do yet is write the first Harry Potter novel. So creativity, I think, is going to be a skill that's super
Great analogy.
premium as AI systems become more readily adopted, and critical thinking, problem solving. How do I take this awesome technology and apply it in a way that benefits my customers, benefits my organization?
I'll probably come in with a little bit of a hotter take on this one. If I was a marketing student right now, well, first you have to make sure that you're in the right space, right? And just the fact that Depaul is hosting this means that you're probably in the right space. I've been lucky enough throughout my career to get to work with a lot of big companies, right? Like I even go back, I did a lot of work with Nike and Jordan Brand, helping on a lot of big marketing projects. I go back and look at what I did from beginning to end on those projects, and I would agree with Sam Altman. 90 to 95% of that could have been done with generative AI if you actually know how each of these individual systems work, how to get the most out of them, right? If you don't know what you're doing in each of these systems, no, 90 to 95% of it cannot be automated. But it's about using the right tool or technique at the right time, understanding what deliverables that they may or may not produce. As a very simple example, if you're needing to get images for a blog post, which is what a lot of marketers might spend some time doing, right? If you're doing that as an example in DALL-E 3, it's not the right tool, right? You should probably be using something like Midjourney, right? So if you're using, I think, the right tool, right
Somebody else, Cockrell family, something or other.
Susan. Susan? Trying to mute
we can
you.
tag team it.
Okay.
But yeah, like I do think even getting back to the point that you made earlier, like even things on like sales calls, right? Things that you think are so unique and so special that only the best human can do it. Well, we are going to be enabled and empowered by other AI tools, right? Like think of a sales call. You think, oh, that's something AI could never do. That's for humans only. No, the best salespeople right now are using real-time sales AI sales analysis tools to let them know. You have your five talking points. It lets you know, am I hitting them all? It's understanding the other person's sentiments. Like there's a reason why Zoom just released a bunch of AI features. Google Meet 2 days ago just released a lot of new AI features, because even things that we think are uniquely or only for humans, I do think that we will be relying on AI tools. I'd like to say swap out the word AI for internet. Do you use the internet for sales? Yes. Do you use the internet to help manage your relationships? Yes. So I don't really see a very high percentage of things, at least in marketing, that would not be further powered or further enabled with artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Anaya. I'm a social and experiential marketer. And I had a question based on kind of a concern I have about conveniency of AI. I use it day to day for a multitude of reasons, both in my part-time and full-time jobs. But I think because I'm Gen Z and because I work in social, that there's this conveniency to rely on it, and I find myself having these habits where I'm like, oh, I can just use AI, or I could just do this. I don't need to really think about it. But with that, I think there's a notion that I'm not sharpening my critical thinking skills, and I would just kind of want to know what you guys' recommendation or advice could be on not letting something control you. I don't want to sound crazy, but not letting the tool control you. And then also if it's some sort of exercise where I'm still utilizing my brain, for lack of better words, with that, and making sure that I'm not relying on artificial intelligence to do my job for me? Thanks.
Wow, who wants to tackle that one? Any thoughts?
Tough question.
Oh,
I will say something. It's not a direct answer to your question, but I think one thing that I found students find interesting when they use AI in, for example, courses, is if you actually design these assignments so that they can actually think about the problem they're giving, whatever AI tool they're using, the prompt they're using, and then how to refine those prompts iteratively and make it more sophisticated based on the answers they're getting. So then what they're doing is actually engaging in some critical thinking and thinking about, first of all, how this particular application that they're using works, but also how they can use it in a way that they get the kind of answers you want. To some extent, this is also the answer to the previous question James asked. Those kinds of creative engagements or interactions with some of these tools are not going to go away. In fact, they're going to be enhanced by some of these tools. I'm thinking about just standard kind of a scientific method, right? If you're in sciences, they tell you, okay, you make observations, you develop a hypothesis, a question, and then you develop a theory. Then you test to see, if the predictions from your models basically match, the reality, observed reality, right? And then you revise that hypothesis. So you can think of it to some extent in that way, right? If you're a marketer and your boss comes and tells you, write me an ad copy that integrates these bullet points that I'm giving you right now, your job is going to go away, right? that is going to be automated. It's already automated, right? But if you have to actually think about, what to put into the prompt that you are giving the AI tool to generate the ad copy, to make it more engaging, things like that, then you have to not just think about it, but maybe interact with it multiple times, and then test that hypothesis, right? So there is still room for creativity, and I think that goes a little bit beyond just prompt engineering, right? It's more than that. So it's about the human in the loop.
yeah. And I wonder if it's maybe not about you not using your brain, but now being able to do 10 things versus 2 in a day. So it's automating lower tasks, and now you can do 10, and you can be so much more efficient, and maybe even take on new things that you can learn. That's kind of how I approach it. Like when the internet started and kids didn't have to drive to a library, oh my God, that saves like how many hours of back and forth. Well, it doesn't mean they don't know how to look things up. It just means they can do things faster and look up more stuff. So that's kind of how I would look at it.
I'd also, adjacent to what the professor was saying, get in the habit of using it more for inspiration rather than finished product. If I'm going to write an article, for example, on 5 ethical issues with AI adoption in healthcare, I might go up to an AI system and say, hey, give me 20 ethical issues in, in AI adoption in healthcare, and those things will inspire me to go write something else in my own voice. So use it for inspiration rather than asking it to do the work for you.
Did you want to?
Only thing I'd add is don't let it replace human conversation. Use it to say, here's what I have in my fridge, give me 3 recipes I can make, but also ask your friends what they made for dinner, or call your grandma and ask for her spaghetti meatball recipe. So it has awesome application, but just don't let it replace real human connection.
I have a follow-up to that. Can I follow up to that?
Sure.
So would you guys suggest that you limit it? Because I think it's abusing a tool. That's my fear. Would you suggest I'm gonna use it only for 30 minutes out the day, similar to how Apple uses a time clock for social media uses and stuff like that. And I'm only asking this because I'm Gen Z and I see it. So I feel as a consumer, it's a real I don't know, a really concerning notion.
I think it depends on what you do in that half an hour you set aside. If you go on TikTok, then maybe it's not. If you want, maybe that would be.
Yeah, I'd say this, I think in general, marketing and advertising are going to change drastically. I think even what will be required out of marketers or advertisers or people working in social media will change. Personally, if I was in your position, I would not try to limit, my time using a generative AI tool. The way I like to think of it is, maybe you would have thought of yourself historically as a creator, right? If you're working on social media. So instead, shift your mindset and think now you are a creative director, right? And you are directing these different generative AI systems at different steps of the process, right? And what that allows you to do by using generative AI, by being able to talk and have conversations with unstructured data, is it allows you to create better marketing. That is actually, people don't understand this, I don't think, like you can actually create much more, much better content that resonates with humans the more you use generative AI. I know I'm probably in the minority when I say that, but the availability of data and the amount of data that most companies have on their consumers, I mean, it's sickening, right? Like you can go on your website and you can literally watch recordings of, people and how they use and how they scroll and what they highlight, right? So multiply that times millions of data points, and I think a lot of companies have so much untapped data. So I think that if I was in your position, I would start, again, thinking more of a creative director and how you can use all of this data and generative AI tools to create more impactful marketing and advertising, because I do think it's going to have to become much more personalized, right? Because now consumers are drowning in a sea of, just generic, let's delve into this, right? Like we don't want any more of that. We want something that resonates with us personally and it feels like, oh, this person wrote this just for me.
I had first one over here, Fred, and then.
I think this is a question, Scott. Okay, you mentioned boards and C-suites. My work focuses on helping clients define board opportunities. I have not worked with anybody that has experience, expertise in AI. And I know of very few boards that have anyone with experience and expertise in AI. And a key role of a board member is to mitigate risk. How do you see the transition to recruiting board members? The people that know AI now aren't the typical profile of a board member. They're more like Gen Z, and board members typically aren't Gen Zers. And I assume the C-suite may be similar. So from the top down, it's confusion.
Yes.
Next question.
I mean, that's the question right now, right? How do we address this? And maybe not ironically, but the larger the organization, the slower it is to move on these things. So, I talked to some board members, they want to put these things on the agenda for, 2-3 quarters from now, or they did do that. Now it's like, well, the thing we were talking about is 4 iterations past, like the conversation is irrelevant at that point, because the velocity of innovation in AI right now is pretty scary. I mean, it's far outpacing our understanding of its risk, our ability to govern it, our understanding of the downstream ethical impacts of even doing it. And I think we need to be getting our arms around this sooner rather than later, because if you adopt this technology, sometimes it's hard to back out of it. You've either made an investment that you can't walk away from, getting an outcome that you weren't expecting, or you have to shut the whole thing down. Somebody's going to lose their job over that, right? So it's kind of funny because these are the conversations that were happening at boards maybe 10 years ago about cybersecurity. Like, it needed to bubble up to that level to get the attention that it needed. That's where we're at now. That is the question. I don't have an answer for you, because that's the question that boards are asking right now.
My own thinking for an answer to reach out to, like the National Association of Corporate Directors, the Private Directors Association, the various colleges and universities that have board education programs. Deloitte has a program, and getting them to put a component about AI in there and educate people that are qualified already and give them the knowledge.
I completely agree. And one of the services we offer, and I'm not plugging myself, but really is, I firmly believe that if you leave AI adoption in the hands of your CIO as a technical issue, you're gonna fail. This is gonna transform every business vertical in your organization. So executives and board members they don't need to understand how these systems work. They don't need, you start talking to them about supervised versus unsupervised training or regression versus logistics, eyes glaze over, What you need to do is teach them to ask the questions. What questions does a CFO need to be asking about AI adoption? Or the marketing person, or the legal department? The CIO will cover the tech piece. What are all the other questions in your business verticals that need to be asked about AI adoption? And I think it starts very quickly. Organizations need to choose pretty quick whether they want to have a chief AI officer or whether they want an AI governance committee.
Yeah, I'm in
Or both.
I'm in a Slack group that mentioned they saw somebody with a chief AI officer title and how crazy that seemed. But if there's ever been a position that like should be created and it's going to feel weird at first, it's this one. But businesses should have at this point a AI council that's multifunctional, that has representation throughout your organization, that is identifying where there are opportunities, where you can test out different things at different levels for different teams. If it's a pure top-down approach, it's going to take a massive educational effort to even get that right once you have the data to support it and the governance around it. So it has to be a full organization-wide approach. I don't think it's something that can come straight down from the board to say, all right, time to use AI. My dad is the head of the AI committee at his law firm. He can't spell AI. And he's got to tap into the younger audience there. But
Depaul's law school.
yeah.
Katie had a question up there, and then
Yeah,
I'll
just
come
kind
back
of
down.
tying into that, having a chief AI officer or whatnot, how do you correlate that with privacy and with all of the, Stacy, I'm looking at your poster, demanding transparency, not only from your media, but also from consumers. And as consumers are starting to really be tied into how they're opting into what they're paying attention to on the web and how we're collecting, I hate the word collect, but how data is being organized and transpired across the web and how that translates into AI and being brand safe for all intents and purposes from an agency perspective, which I'm on, and for our clients as well.
There's so much to say, and it makes me think about the cookie going away, frankly, because I think there's a love-hate relationship with AI as it pertains to the open web. Tell me if you agree, which is, the New York Times is suing ChatGPT, is it? Because all of their data is feeding the algorithm. And for journalism to thrive, they need to have advertisers giving them money for premium content, et cetera. But with the cookie going away, it's going to make it harder for measurement.
Who do we target?
Who do we target? But what we're working on, which is modeled behavior that's going to improve performance across the board, is all privacy compliant without the cookie. It's taking 1 million attributes from the bid stream and predicting who's most likely to convert. All privacy safe, no cookie involved. Our legal team is thoroughly investigating to make sure everything is compliant. And so I forget where I was going, but my point about journalism was important to me, which is AI. I think New York Times should get paid for feeding that system. And I'm afraid that all of the advertising dollars are going to go to the walled gardens post-cookie deprecation because of these same concerns.
It's so funny because Katie's a friend and a client, Stacy's my manager here with Openx. So you guys must have been hearing my question. As cookieless, I was gonna ask you guys, I know as Openx, we're a supply side platform. I am plugging us because we're sponsoring and I'm in sales. We're ready in the sense that we are a supply side platform. So we are relying on our partners, our contextual partners, our data partners, that we're layering that across our supply. We are simply, not really simply actually, we are the pipes to the people because we are those pipes for the publishers. Now, are we ready for the deprecation of the cookie? Maybe, but what do you guys think is AI going to replace the cookie? Are we moving away from the cookie as a whole? And how will AI ultimately tailor a user's ad experience in the same way or similar or different than the cookie has tailored our personal ad experience?
I think it's going to make the cookie look like rookie hour.
Yeah. Oh,
I do, because not only will we be able to retarget using a million attributes, but we'll be able to look at sentiment and reaction, et cetera, and it should be more powerful. Would you agree? And we haven't even touched creative.
So I don't think cookie is gonna go away.
Really?
Yes. I think in specific use cases, it's going to potentially can be replaced by AI because of some of the touch points that you were talking about. So, but cookies are used for lots of different reasons, not just in target marketing. So it's also used for sharing across different platforms and domains, and some of that stuff, some of the uses of cookies, it's difficult to see how it might be replaced by just use of AI. You gotta be, if you want to track a particular individual across many different websites and many different domains and many different applications, I don't think you can replace that experience with just use of some AI application. So that's just off the top of my head, but if you're using it for targeted advertising within your own platform, then I think there's probably a case to be made for that.
okay. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. So in your opening statement, Professor, you said that you're gonna see around $100 billion being invested into AI by large companies. Can any of you speak to exactly where this money will be going? Is it infrastructure or is it something different?
A lot of it is going to building larger and larger models. So more data. By the way, people are reaching a limit of available good data based on which you can train models. So that's an issue. And they're relying now on actually another use of generative models to generate synthetic data that can be used based on certain parameters to sort of mimic the existing real data and then use more data to be able to train larger and larger models. So some of it is that, some of it is infrastructure. Interestingly, on the other side of it, there's a lot of work being done on actually creating models that can do as well, but not with so much data. So that's a research direction that potentially can change all of that. So in my view, some of these companies that are planning to spend hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure in the next few years, they're taking a very big risk that they're relying on some of those newer models that are maybe just as effective but much smaller are not going to work out. Either that or they're planning on killing them off maybe, which is what some of the large companies do often, right? So we'll have to see.
I'd say right now,
Follow-up question on that. How far are we really to AGI, right? So I know everyone has a different definition of what AGI is, but thinking as a human, reasoning, all of that, right? Given the pace of compute over the past 2 to 5 years, which has gone up exponentially, how far away from reality really is that?
I think we are very far from that. So these generative models sometimes can surprise you by the kinds of things, kind of results that they give you, which seems like magic, seems like they're sentient. But I was pointing out earlier, they are not, right? They're just statistical models that are making predictions about what should come next, or what should come in a particular context. So it's a long way between that and real sentience where you have automated agents with the ability to reason and actually solve problems outside the context of lots and lots of data that they have seen and modeled, right? So I think that would be required to have that level of intelligence. I'm not personally that big on the whole idea of AGI, but I know a lot of people sort of obsessed with that idea. I don't think AI is going to make humanity go extinct. I think humanity is going to make humanity go extinct long before AI does that. So I think there are bigger problems to worry about.
Jordan, were you gonna point to that?
I'll just talk about AGI. So I'd say we're probably, I'm on the opposite side. I'd say we're probably a lot closer than most people think. There's a certain, oh gosh, I wish I would have written this down, the name of the chart, but there's an average, of how far off, the world's leading computer scientists have thought we are from AGI. So I think 30 years ago they said, or 20 years ago they said we were 50 years. 10 years ago they said we were 12 years, and now most people would say, hey, it's probably within the next decade, right? I was lucky enough to be in a closed door session with the NVIDIA CEO, right? He essentially all but said less than 5 years. You also have to look at what is intelligence, right? That's another thing. So I'd say narrowly, if you look at narrow versus general, right? Narrow right now, you can make the argument on single tasks, the best generative AI system trained on a single task is better than the best human at that task, right? I'm fine in saying, I've won national writing awards, I was a Pulitzer Fellow, ChatGPT's a better writer than me, right, if you know how to use it. So I think in very narrow applications, I would say technically you're already there by the benchmarks, but I'd say we're a lot closer than people think. But I also think it is going to be a lot less destructive than people think. People think AGI, they think Terminator, they think end of the world. I don't think that's necessarily how it will work. But I'm just some guy that talks to smart people.
I'll put my philosopher hat on for a minute. Will AI ever become sentient, intelligent? Well, it depends on how you define these terms, right? And if it does, we're assuming that self-awareness and sentience is going to mimic human intelligence and sentience. That may not be the case. But what we do know now is AI has no moral agency. And what I mean by that is it is not aware of what it's doing. It may never become aware of what it's doing in the sense that we're aware of who we are and what we do and that we're our place in the world. It is not taking outputs or its behaviors or its recommendations. Getting back to moral agency, it is not evaluating itself against a set of principles that it considers to be right or wrong or good or bad. It is analyzing massive amounts of data, finding patterns in that data that may not be readily apparent, and when I'm asking it a question, it's making a prediction of what I'm asking for based on those patterns. But it is not presenting me anything that it considers to be good or bad because it has no moral agency.
Stephen, you had your hand up for a while.
I just wanted to come back to something that you were talking about a little earlier, and it has to do with what should marketing students and people who practice do at this point. And what I'd be interested in is, as you've just been saying, what is this change like in your mind relative to other changes that we've seen in history? People talk in great terms. It's like, okay, this is different, like going from no electricity to electricity, going from no internet to internet. What is the change like, and what does it mean for an individual? I'll give you an example. In the last 7-8 months, I've been writing a lot and using ChatGPT. I find that it's a lame writer, if you will, and I apologize for using that term. It can't get all the way into creative use of language. And what I find is that we're changing from being the creator to being someone who needs to manage that system. And as you were saying, what does it mean to be an art director rather than somebody who's creating content. What are these changes that you anticipate people should be thinking about making or adjustments given the kind of change you think it is? Is it a major shift like no electricity to electricity, or is it something that's not quite as grand as that?
Grand.
Well, I would venture to say something about the first part of what you said, is how big of a change it is. And I would say that there's one thing that makes it difficult to answer that question compared to electricity and no electricity, internet versus no internet, or something like that. And that's our imagination. The problem is the hype associated with AI has always been bigger than the reality of AI. I pointed to some of them. This has existed for a long time. There's one other area that I can think of that's like that, and that's space exploration. I mean, people have been thinking about rockets going to different planets and things like that. I don't know, from ever since people could make movies or write books, certainly in the early 20th century and on. And people imagine all sorts of things, space travel, things like that, Star Wars, Star Trek. All of those were well beyond any kind of a capacity that we ever had. We still don't have, right, compared to what was being portrayed. So if you ask, would space travel, think about the idea of transformer technology in Star Trek, right? You can transport from this location to another location in the blink of an eye, right? If that technology existed, really, right, you can imagine that it would really be revolutionary and totally disruptive of lots of different industries. More generally, AI is the same way. People can imagine a lot of things, but whether or not it becomes reality, I think, is an unanswered question. And some of the obstacles we see, we talked about the gap between the adoption, for example, and the existence technology, is part of it. The other part is we don't really know where all of this is going. In the real, there's a lot of hype out there, but the reality of it, we don't know, for example, as people try to deploy some of these models, what the implications are, long-term implications are going to be, what are the consequences, both ethical consequences as well as actual consequences on jobs, on society, everything else. And I think there are going to be some of those things that are going to become roadblocks to further development of some of these technologies. So that's a long way of saying, I don't think we can answer that question yet.
Anyone else want to tackle that, or other questions?
Well, one of his questions he said at the beginning was he was wondering about where it's going for marketers. And one of the big things that we talk about at our agency is the fact that the US Copyright Office said that anything created by AI is not yours. So even if you start it that way, and so I think that's something that people need to keep in mind when they're working on things, and maybe you've dealt with that with clients and ethics, is that it's not yours if you start it with AI or you start a paper. And so that's something that even when you're creating like your posts,
It has logo implications.
Yeah, it has big implications when you're creating things, so that's something marketers are really gonna have to work on as well. So I don't know if you have anything to add to the legal issues of that and ownership.
I'm not a lawyer. But I was reading a couple articles recently where the patent office said that an AI system cannot apply for a patent. Then the question becomes, and I think this is adjacent to what you're talking about, then the question becomes who owns that idea? These are unresolved questions, right? These are questions that are just starting to emerge. And I think from a government, especially in the US, regulatory perspective, we tend to lag way behind where the innovation and the technology is. So I think the short answer is this is going to be an open question for a while.
As strange as it sounds, I think that copyright in general is going to be open for interpretation, even though it shouldn't. It's cut and dry, right? So, we'll see I think the first big domino that's going to fall is the New York Times versus OpenAI lawsuit, where the New York Times alleged that OpenAI used millions with an S of its articles without permission that were all copyrighted material. But OpenAI has pretty much said to the European Union, like, we're challenging what copyright is. And it's an old law, so we're going to challenge what it means. It's a strange time that I think that we're living in, especially as marketers, because you have to go through and you have to have those tough ethical and moral dilemmas, right? So a great example is Adobe, right? So if you look at a company like Midjourney and how they've trained their AI image model, they've essentially said we've trained it on the open internet, which includes a lot of copyrighted materials. Adobe for months has been saying we're only training our Firefly model on images that we have the rights to, right? And then it just came out last week, they're also training on Midjourney images, which are, right? So copyright, I think, is going to be under attack. We'll see if it holds up, and in different countries, I'm sure we'll see different rulings. But I think that's what as marketers you should be paying attention to. On what does copyright law look like? And I know that sounds very weird to say like, oh, there's room for interpretation, because in theory there's not, but in theory there might be.
One of the things that I wanted to add was that there's no such thing, and this goes back to all time. I was told by a copywriter early in my career that there's no such thing as good writing. There's only good rewriting. And that most people and people who are interacting with AI today, if you take it and start sending it around, you'll find, as I mentioned earlier, it's not a very good writer. And so editing becomes extremely important. And knowing how you want to use language is something that, so far, this device doesn't seem to be able to do. So I encourage you to become really good rewriters. And that means editing, and that means knowing language, which is going to take some time for, I think, AI to know what you intend to say.
I think to use it properly, this is the educator in me, what I tell the students, you can't prompt it unless you're already good at what you're asking it to do. So in my classes, I said, go ahead and use it, but I bet you I know, right? So in my AI class, it's like the goal is, I don't even know you used it at the end. You can't prompt it. It can't be cheating for students that don't know the lesson to begin with, right? So I'm not a great writer. Jordan's a great writer. There's probably tons of great writers in here. And I'm never going to be a great writer, but it'll get me so far, right?
That kind of goes along with what we were talking about, like for those in school right now, it's like what to study. Like I went to Depaul, class of 2009. You're welcome.
This was not staged. It was
Not
on
staged.
accident.
There was no AI. There was no programmatic digital media. It was really just starting. What are your all thoughts on those who are studying, looking to come into this industry, jobs that require you to be the prompter, and I'm blanking on the name of it, but some type of engineer. Prompt engineer. I said both words, just not together. A prompt engineer. And what types of skills should students at Depaul and elsewhere be studying to be, whether they're going to be a prompt engineer or if they just want to engage with AI tools to help me write that amazing sales email? How do I learn how to be a better prompter in my day-to-day? And will those jobs exist in a way that people in jobs that can be replaced by AI will then become should they be looking at become prompt engineers, if you will?
So Jackie said something that I think is relevant to this, and she said that to even ask the right question, you have to already know have the knowledge of the domain. So I think that's going to be true. I'm not a marketing person, but I think this applies to many domains. If you want to use these tools to get the right kind of answer, the kind of answer that actually are more creative and more to the point, and maybe actually more helpful, not sort of some kind of a generic answer, you have to actually know what kind of question you're asking, and then you need to become more detailed and maybe do rewrite of the question a little bit more. So you have to be knowledgeable about the domain, about what are the requirements, what you intend to achieve at the end. If you don't know those things, just simply using the tool and hoping that it would give you magically the answer, I don't think it's going to work. And I think that's true in most domains. The idea of prompt engineering is a little bit different. It's not about necessarily knowing your domain. So it's sort of the idea of having a human in the loop as part of the reinforcement feedback process that trains these models. And yes, there's a new sort of career developing as prompt engineers. But those generic kind of prompt engineering careers where you sort of develop gazillion different prompts for different domains and then try to improve these models, I predict that that's going to go away because even that is going to be automated to a large extent. These are, for the most part, even the tuning of these models, which requires that kind of relevance feedback approach or reinforcement learning approach, is going to become self or semi-self supervised. So these models sort of train themselves basically based on the initial prompts that they generate, or have other AI tools generate the prompts that they use to train these other models. So eventually that's going to go away, but I think the necessity of understanding what you are, how you're using this tool and why you're using it and what you expect from it, and asking the right questions, I think that's not going to go away.
We have about 5 minutes left, and then there's a reception on the 11th floor afterwards where we can continue talking about this individually. James, you have one final question?
So this is a riff on the question from the gentleman over there who said his board doesn't know AI. In this room, we've got a sort of a fairly good understanding of AI, and over here we have a very good understanding of AI. When someone comes to you and says, where should I go? What should I read? What's your sort of favored recommendation? Is there a book, a podcast, a website, a movie? Sort of things people to sort of understand.
All right. Jordan Nelson. He's a homework assignment in my classes. So.
I can take this. I'll recommend something else. This is maybe gonna sound strange. I have a book that I love called On Writing Well. It's by William Zinsser. It's one of my favorite books. I try to reread it, every couple of years. I think it's important, and going back to the concept of prompt engineering, which is both a very fake term and a very real term at the same time. I think the same way that people Google things now, right? Like, I'd really love to see this. Like, does anyone in here for their job not use Google? Right? I would say no, you're lying, right? I think the same thing will be true very soon with prompt engineering, right? Like if you're not prompting on a daily basis already, number one, you need to talk to, who's ever, C-suite people at your company and say, why am I not prompt engineering already? Because that means your company might not be in the best shape right now, but that's another discussion for another day. But I would say the art of writing well is one of the most important things, because no matter the system that you're talking about, whether you're talking about a large language model, whether you're talking about Adobe, right? I talked about Adobe earlier and how they're they're going to be integrating OpenAI, Sora, and all of these other things. You're getting now text inputs in different fields, in different mediums that maybe didn't require text before. So the ability to write well, to understand your words have meaning, go into, another great tool, like go into a tokenizer, go into the OpenAI's playground and start typing and see what that means when a large language model receives it, because it's all tokenized. So I'd love to just plug all everyday AI podcasts. You can if you want, but I love that book.
Yeah. Do we want to start here and then go down, Justin?
On the same topic?
Yeah. Is there any suggestions?
I'm more I'm more interested in practical applications from businesses, so more in tune with reading agency and marketing kind of periodicals. I am not a like AI generalist by any means, so I'm more interested in how businesses are actually using it. So I focus more on like industry specific periodicals, basically.
For me, in preparation of this, I spoke to our engineering and product team. If you have access to that, they've been such a wealth of information, which is ironic because all of my information is coming from people. And then today, I asked ChatGPT what some of the risks are with AI, and all of them have come up today, which is
Interesting.
ironic.
Specifically around AI ethics, there's a book called, I recommend, is Oxford Handbook of Ethics of AI, and it was edited by Marcus Duber. And it's kind of a survey of the topic. It's a collection of essays. It's about 2 years old, but the concepts still pertinent. I mean, they're still relevant. It's a great read. It'll give you a wide survey of ethics in AI.
I would recommend a book called The Atlas of AI. It's by Kate Crawford, who worked at Microsoft, still works at Microsoft has been working there for a long time. But it is about the political and social and economic context in which AI is being used. And I think it's very, very important. It's a couple of years old now, but I think the message is very important. By the way, she's going to be speaking as our commencement speaker.
Oh, wow, that's cool. And AI and Marketing Institute, Paul Retzer and Mike Cook, they have a podcast. They also write a lot of cool things on LinkedIn. They have certifications, they do webinars. They're another good resource.
There's a lot of online courses also. I've taken 5 online courses.
Okay. Well, I think with that, I'd like to thank you for being here and especially our panelists for being here. I could keep talking. It's one of the things I do. This like fascinates me. I could talk forever on the topic, but all right. So 11th floor, we have a reception, bar, appetizers, and I welcome you to go up and continue talking and meeting each other. So thank you. Thank you very much. She was checking the batteries before, well, you were here, you saw that. So she must have missed this one.
Great. Sit between you two. I was feeling
Hi, everybody.
Match up.